Bullies locked her in the boys' bathroom. She made them cry in front of everyone. The fluorescent lights in Riverside Valley High hummed their monotonous tune as Jordan Blake pressed herself against the cool metal of her locker, hoping to become invisible. It was a Tuesday morning in early September, and the hallways throbbed with the chaotic energy of students rushing between classes, slamming lockers, shouting greetings across the crowded corridor. Jordan kept her eyes down, focusing on the scuffed tiles beneath her worn sneakers, counting the seconds until the bell would ring and release her into the relative safety of Mrs. Henderson's English class. She was small for her build, with straight dark hair that fell past her shoulders and hazel eyes that seemed perpetually fixed on the ground. Her clothes were clean but outdated, thrift store finds that her mother had carefully selected to stretch their tight budget. Jordan's father had been deployed overseas for the third time in 5 years, leaving her mother to work double shifts at the medical clinic while trying to keep their modest apartment afloat. They had moved to this suburban California town at the end of summer, another relocation in a string of military transfers that had defined Jordan's entire existence. The problem was that Riverside Valley High had its hierarchies firmly established, its social territories clearly marked. Jordan had arrived too late, too quiet, too different. She spoke with a slight accent from their last posting in Georgia, dressed in clothes that marked her as poor, and possessed an awkward shyness that seemed to radiate from her like a beacon attracting predators. The predators had names. Brittany Caldwell was the ringleader, a tall blonde with sharp green eyes and a smile that could cut glass. She was captain of the volleyball team, dated the quarterback of the football team, and ruled the junior class with an iron fist wrapped in designer labels. Her father owned the largest car dealership in 3 counties, and Brittany made sure everyone knew it. She moved through the hallways like royalty, flanked by her court of loyal followers who laughed at her jokes and echoed her cruelties. Beside her walked Madison Torres, whose dark curls and perfect makeup made her look like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Madison was clever and calculating, the strategist behind many of Brittany's most elaborate schemes. She had a talent for finding weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. Then there was Ashley Chen, whose family had immigrated from Taiwan 2 generations ago and who seemed determined to prove her belonging by being more American, more popular, more ruthless than anyone else. She was small but fierce, with a sharp tongue that could reduce someone to tears in 3 sentences or less. The 2 boys who orbited this toxic solar system were Dylan Morrison and Jake Patterson. Dylan was the quarterback, predictably handsome with his square jaw and athletic build, but possessed of a mean streak that manifested in casual cruelty. Jake was his shadow, a linebacker who used his size to intimidate and his fists to punctuate Dylan's verbal assaults. Together, they formed a wall of casual violence that most students learned to avoid. Jordan had learned this on her 3rd day at Riverside Valley High. It started small, as these things always do, a shoulder check in the hallway that sent her books scattering. Laughter that followed her into the cafeteria, whispered comments just loud enough for her to hear, but quiet enough that no teacher would intervene. Jordan had dealt with bullies before, in other schools, other towns. Her father had taught her that some battles were not worth fighting, that sometimes survival meant endurance rather than confrontation. But Riverside Valley High was different. The cruelty here was more organized, more persistent, more creative. The cafeteria at Riverside Valley High was a cavernous space with high ceilings and long tables arranged in unofficial territories. The athletes claimed the tables nearest the windows, where afternoon sunlight streamed through and gilded their perfect faces with golden light. The academic overachievers clustered near the food line, studying between bites. The artists and theater kids occupied the far corner, loud and expressive. And the unclaimed students, the invisible ones, scattered themselves wherever space could be found. Jordan usually ate alone at a small table near the emergency exit, a position that allowed for quick escape if necessary. She brought her lunch from home, sandwiches made with day-old bread and discount cold cuts, wrapped carefully in reused plastic bags. She had learned to eat quickly, to finish before anyone noticed her, to clean up and disappear into the library for the remainder of the lunch period. On the fourth day of school, Brittany Caldwell noticed her. Jordan was halfway through her sandwich when a shadow fell across her table. She looked up to find Brittany standing there, flanked by Madison and Ashley, all three of them wearing expressions of theatrical concern that sent ice water through Jordan's veins. "Oh my God," Brittany said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Are you eating by yourself? That's so sad." Madison leaned closer, examining Jordan's lunch with exaggerated interest. "Is that like generic brand lunch meat? I didn't know they still made that." Ashley wrinkled her nose. "My mom says you can get food poisoning from cheap meat." "Just saying." Jordan felt her face burning, but she kept her eyes on her sandwich, willing them to leave. Experience had taught her that engagement only prolonged the encounter, gave them more ammunition, more opportunities to demonstrate their power. Brittany sighed dramatically. "We're just trying to be nice." "You're new here, right? Someone should tell you that sitting alone is like super weird. People are going to think you're a freak." "She already looks like a freak," Ashley muttered, just loud enough for Jordan to hear. "Look at that shirt. Is that from Goodwill?" The three girls laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and then they were gone, leaving Jordan alone with her half-eaten sandwich and the burning awareness that every eye in the cafeteria had witnessed her humiliation. She wrapped up the remainder of her lunch with shaking hands and walked quickly to the library, where she locked herself in a bathroom stall and fought back tears that she refused to let fall. The attacks escalated with careful precision. In the gym, where students were required to dress in matching athletic uniforms, Jordan became a target for a different kind of cruelty. She changed quickly in the corner of the locker room, trying to avoid attention, but Madison always seemed to be watching. "God, you're so skinny," Madison said one afternoon, loud enough for the entire locker room to hear. "Do you, not eat? Are you one of those anorexic girls?" Jordan wasn't skinny, not really. She was slender and small-boned, built like her father's side of the family, but Madison's comment made every other girl in the locker room turn and stare. Jordan felt their eyes cataloging her body, judging her, finding her wanting. "I eat," Jordan said quietly, the first words she had spoken directly to her tormentors. "Oh, she speaks," Ashley said, delighted. "We were starting to think you were mute or something, like literally brain damaged." The laughter followed Jordan onto the gym floor, where they were playing volleyball. Brittany was, of course, the team captain, and she made sure to serve the ball directly at Jordan's face every time it was her turn. Jordan managed to return the first few serves, but the fourth one caught her in the shoulder with enough force to leave a bruise. She stumbled back, and Dylan Morrison, who had been watching from the bleachers, let out a loud laugh. "Nice one, Brittany. Target practice." Coach Williams blew his whistle, but there was no real authority in the sound. He was a man who had learned long ago that controlling the social dynamics of teenagers was beyond his job description. He rotated the teams and moved on, leaving Jordan to nurse her bruised shoulder and her bruised dignity in silence. The parking lot after school became another battlefield. Jordan didn't have a car, couldn't afford the insurance, even if she could have borrowed her mother's aging sedan, so she walked home every day. The walk was 30 minutes through quiet suburban streets, lined with neat houses and manicured lawns, a journey that should have been peaceful, but instead filled her with dread. Brittany and her friends often hung out in the parking lot after school, sitting on the hoods of expensive cars, vaping and laughing and watching the other students leave. Jordan tried to slip past unnoticed, but it rarely worked. "Hey, Salvation Army," Brittany would call out, using the nickname that had somehow stuck, spreading through the school like a virus. "Did you walk here from the homeless shelter?" Jordan would keep walking, her face burning, while their laughter followed her down the street. Sometimes Dylan would rev his truck engine as he passed her, close enough that she had to jump onto the grass to avoid being hit. Jake would lean out the window and shout something crude, something that made her skin crawl and her stomach turn over. At home, Jordan's mother asked about school with the tired optimism of a woman who desperately wanted to believe her daughter was adjusting, was making friends, was finally finding stability in this latest temporary home. Jordan lied with practiced ease, talked about her classes and her teachers, mentioned the library and the interesting books she was reading. She never mentioned the bullying, never described the daily humiliations that were becoming as routine as breathing. Her mother had enough to worry about. The bills were piling up on the kitchen counter, and Jordan could hear her mother on the phone late at night, talking in hushed tones about payment plans and extensions. Her father was due home in 3 months, a countdown that Jordan marked on her calendar with desperate hope. He would understand. He would know what to do. But 3 months was an eternity when you were living through daily torture. The classroom should have been safer, but Brittany had friends in every period, and they knew how to make Jordan's life miserable without ever attracting teacher attention. In history, someone would kick the back of her chair throughout the entire lecture. In math, her pencils would disappear from her desk while she was looking away. In English, Mrs. Henderson would assign group projects, and Jordan would always be the last one chosen, added reluctantly to whatever group had the fewest members, where she would be ignored and dismissed when she tried to contribute. The worst part was the isolation. Other students, sensing the social danger of associating with Jordan, gave her a wide berth. She ate alone, studied alone, walked alone. She became a ghost in her own life, present but unseen, existing in the margins of a world that had no space for her. 3 weeks into the school year, something shifted. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Jordan had stayed late in the library, working on an essay that was due the next day. The library was her sanctuary, a quiet space where the librarian, Mr. Kowalski, enforced strict rules about noise and behavior. Brittany and her friends never came to the library, so Jordan could breathe there, could lower her guard just slightly. She left at 5 o'clock when Mr. Kowalski announced the library was closing. The hallways were empty, echoing with the hollow sound of her footsteps. The janitor was somewhere on the 3rd floor, the distant hum of his floor buffer audible through the walls. Jordan headed toward the main exit, her backpack heavy with textbooks and notebooks, her mind already focused on the walk home. She didn't see them until it was too late. Brittany stepped out from the girls' bathroom near the main entrance, flanked by Madison and Ashley. Behind them, Dylan and Jake emerged from the boys' bathroom across the hall. They had been waiting, Jordan realized with a sinking feeling. They had known she would be here, had planned this. "Well, well," Brittany said, her voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Look who decided to stay after school. Were you, studying? That's so sad." Jordan tried to walk past them, but Jake moved to block her path. He was massive, at least 6 feet tall, and built like the linebacker he was, all muscle and intimidation. Jordan stopped, calculating her options. The main entrance was blocked. The emergency exits had alarms. The nearest occupied classroom was too far away. "We wanted to talk to you," Madison said, her voice falsely sweet. "We think you're, not getting the message. You don't belong here." "Yeah," Ashley added. "You should transfer to a different school, maybe one for poor kids, or homeschool. Your mom probably can't afford to homeschool you, though." Jordan kept her eyes down, her heart pounding. This was different from the usual harassment. This was planned, orchestrated, private. This was dangerous. "We're serious," Brittany continued, stepping closer. You're making everyone uncomfortable with your whole sad poverty vibe. It's depressing, so we thought we'd help you understand that you need to leave. Dylan laughed, a sound without humor. Yeah, consider this an intervention. We're doing you a favor. Jordan tried to move around them, but hands grabbed her backpack, yanking her backward. She stumbled and suddenly they were all around her, pulling at her bag, at her clothes, at her hair. She felt her backpack torn from her shoulders, heard the sound of her textbooks hitting the floor, scattering across the hallway. Her notebook, filled with essays and homework, was torn from her hands, pages ripped out and tossed into the air like confetti. "Stop," Jordan said, her voice small and ineffective. "Please stop." They didn't stop. They pushed her toward the boys' bathroom, and Jordan realized with growing horror what they intended to do. She tried to resist, tried to plant her feet, but Jake grabbed her arm with bruising force and propelled her through the door. The bathroom smelled of industrial cleaner and stale urine, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Before Jordan could turn around, before she could try to escape, the door slammed shut. She heard the sound of something being wedged against the door from the outside, a chair maybe, or a trash can. She tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. Through the door, she could hear them laughing. Brittany's voice, high and cruel, said something Jordan couldn't quite make out, followed by more laughter. Then footsteps fading away down the hallway, leaving her alone in the boys' bathroom with her heart pounding and her hands shaking. Jordan tried the door again, pushing with all her strength, but it wouldn't move. She looked around the bathroom, searching for another exit, but there were only 2 windows high on the wall, too small to climb through and painted shut. She was stuck. She sank down to the floor, her back against the cold tile wall, and finally let the tears come. She cried for the humiliation, for the fear, for the exhaustion of enduring this daily torture with no end in sight. She cried for the girl she used to be, the one who had friends and confidence and a place in the world. She cried for her mother, who was working herself to death to provide for them. She cried for her father, who was half a world away and couldn't protect her. The janitor found her 20 minutes later when he came to clean the bathrooms before locking up for the night. He was an older man with kind eyes who looked deeply uncomfortable at finding a female student locked in the boys' bathroom. He helped her gather her scattered belongings from the hallway, asked if she was okay, suggested maybe she should report what had happened to the principal. Jordan thanked him and lied, said she had accidentally gotten locked in, that it was her own fault. She walked home in the gathering darkness, her textbooks heavy in her arms, her face wet with tears she couldn't seem to stop. When she got home, her mother was already asleep on the couch, exhausted from another double shift. Jordan cleaned herself up in the bathroom, washed her face, changed her clothes. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone she barely recognized, a ghost of a girl with hollow eyes and defeated posture. Something inside her, something that had been bending under the weight of constant cruelty, finally cracked. Jordan had a secret, something she had never told anyone at Riverside Valley High, something that her tormentors didn't know and couldn't imagine. For 8 years, from the time she was young until they had moved to Riverside, Jordan had studied Krav Maga under a retired Israeli Defense Forces instructor who had taught classes at the community center near their old base. Her father had enrolled her after a frightening incident when she was younger, when a stranger had tried to grab her at a park. He had wanted her to be able to defend herself, to never feel helpless. Jordan had taken to the training like she was born for it. She was small and flexible, quick and intuitive. The instructor, a woman named Sarah Levi, who carried herself with quiet authority, had recognized Jordan's potential immediately. She had pushed Jordan hard, teaching her not just the physical techniques, but the mental discipline required to use them. Krav Maga wasn't a sport, Sarah had explained. It was a survival system designed to end threats quickly and efficiently. It was about awareness, about avoidance, about using an attacker's strength against them. Jordan had earned her brown belt before they moved to Riverside. She had certificates and photos from tournaments where she had competed against students twice her size and won. But when they arrived in this new town, there was no Krav Maga school nearby, no money for private lessons, no time between her mother's work schedule and Jordan's school responsibilities. So Jordan had let it lapse, had tucked that part of herself away, had tried to become invisible instead. But sitting on the floor of the boys' bathroom, locked in by her tormentors, Jordan realized that invisibility wasn't working. Endurance wasn't working. Waiting for it to get better wasn't working. She needed a different strategy. That night, after her mother had gone to bed, Jordan went to the garage and found her old training bag, buried under boxes of household items they hadn't unpacked yet. Inside were her hand wraps, her training gloves, her certificates, and a photo of her and Sarah Levi at her brown belt test, both of them smiling and proud. Jordan set up a makeshift training space in the garage, pushing aside boxes and clearing a small area where she could practice. She wrapped her hands carefully, the familiar motion soothing, and began to work through the basic forms she had learned years ago. Her body remembered, even if her mind had tried to forget. The punches came naturally, the kicks felt right. She worked until sweat soaked through her shirt, until her muscles burned, until the fear and humiliation transformed into something sharper, something useful. She would not fight them. That was clear in her mind. She would not become like them, would not stoop to their level of cruelty. But she would not be helpless either. She would prepare herself, would rebuild the strength and confidence she had lost, would become someone who couldn't be locked in bathrooms and laughed at. Jordan trained every night for a week, pushing herself through the routines Sarah had drilled into her years ago. She practiced her strikes on the canvas bag hanging from the garage ceiling, worked on her footwork in the cramped space, ran through scenarios in her mind of how she might respond if cornered again. The physical training helped, but it was the mental discipline that Sarah had emphasized that Jordan found most valuable now. Control, awareness, confidence without aggression. At school, nothing changed. The bullying continued with metronomic regularity. Brittany and her friends seemed energized by their bathroom victory, emboldened to escalate. They started a rumor that Jordan had been suspended for sneaking into the boys' bathroom to spy on them, a lie that spread through the school with horrifying speed. Teachers looked at her differently. Other students whispered when she walked past. The isolation deepened. In the cafeteria, Madison deliberately spilled her drink on Jordan's lunch, soaking the sandwich and the textbook Jordan had been reading. She apologized with theatrical insincerity, said, "Oops," in a way that made it clear the act was intentional. Jordan cleaned up the mess in silence, threw away her ruined lunch, and went hungry the rest of the day. In the gym, during a game of basketball, Ashley deliberately elbowed Jordan in the face, hard enough to make her nose bleed. Coach Williams sent Jordan to the nurse's office, where she held ice to her face and listened to the nurse talk about how accidents happen in sports. Jordan nodded and said nothing because what was there to say? The system was not designed to protect her. Teachers either didn't see the bullying or didn't care. Administrators were too overwhelmed with serious infractions to worry about social dynamics. Jordan was on her own, but now she was training. Every night in the garage, she practiced. Every morning before school, she ran through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, building her stamina and her mental focus. She ate better, slept better, held herself differently. The changes were subtle but significant. Her posture straightened, her gaze lifted from the ground. She didn't flinch when Brittany walked past her in the hallway. It was in the third week of October, 6 weeks into the school year, when Jordan met the person who would change everything. There was an older woman who worked in the school library, someone Jordan had noticed but never really paid attention to. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, and she served as the library's assistant, shelving books and helping students with research. She was perhaps in her 50s, with steel grey hair cut short and dark eyes that seemed to see everything. She moved with a deliberate grace that Jordan recognized from somewhere, some muscle memory that whispered familiar. One afternoon, Jordan was in the library working on homework when Elena approached her table. Jordan looked up, expecting to be told the library was closing or that she needed to move to a different section. Instead, Elena said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "You train." It wasn't a question. Jordan felt her heart skip. "What?" Elena gestured to Jordan's hands, where the faint marks of hand wraps were still visible on her wrists, indentations that hadn't quite faded. "I see the signs. Old injuries healed, new ones fresh. You're practicing something at home, martial arts." Jordan didn't know what to say. She had been so careful to hide this part of herself, to keep it separate from her school identity, but Elena was smiling, a small, knowing smile that held no judgment. "I used to train too," Elena said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without asking permission. "Many years ago in Mexico City, I studied Krav Maga under a former Israeli instructor. Small world, yes?" Jordan stared at her, trying to process this information. Elena didn't look like a martial artist. She looked like a librarian, soft and grandmotherly and safe. But when Jordan looked closer, she saw the same things Elena had noticed in her, the way she held herself, the awareness in her eyes, the controlled economy of her movements. "I stopped training when I moved here," Jordan said quietly. "There's no school nearby." Elena nodded. "I know. I looked when I first arrived too. But training is not about the school, not really. It's about discipline, about practice, about understanding yourself." She paused, studying Jordan with those penetrating dark eyes. "You're being bullied." Again, not a question. Jordan felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. She nodded. "And you're training at home, preparing yourself, but you don't know what to do with it," Elena continued. "Because you're not a fighter. You don't want to hurt anyone. You just want them to stop hurting you." Jordan's throat closed up. She couldn't speak, could only nod again. Elena reached across the table and covered Jordan's hand with her own. Her grip was warm and strong. "Come to my house tomorrow after school. I live 3 blocks from here, on Maple Street. The blue house with the rose garden. I will help you if you want help." Jordan found her voice. "Help me with what?" "With understanding that strength is not about fighting," Elena said. "It's about balance, control, knowing when to act and when to wait. Your instructors taught you how to fight, but I don't think anyone taught you how to win without fighting." She stood up, pushing her chair back in with practiced care. "Tomorrow, if you want, the choice is yours." She walked away, leaving Jordan alone with her homework and a choice that felt monumental. Part of her wanted to refuse, wanted to keep handling things on her own, wanted to maintain the isolation that felt safer than vulnerability. But another part of her, the part that was so tired of being afraid, that was exhausted from the daily humiliations, whispered that maybe this was the help she had been too proud to ask for. The next afternoon, Jordan walked to Maple Street and found the blue house with the rose garden. It was a modest home, neat and well-maintained, with flowers blooming in carefully tended beds. Jordan stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, gathering her courage before walking up the path and knocking on the door. Elena answered immediately, as if she had been waiting. She smiled and stepped aside. "Come in, Jordan." I made tea. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, filled with bookshelves and comfortable furniture and the smell of herbs. Elena led Jordan to a sunroom at the back of the house, where large windows overlooked a small backyard. The space had been converted into a training area, with padded mats on the floor and a heavy bag hanging in the corner. On the walls hung framed photographs of Elena when she was younger, wearing a GI and sparring with partners, holding trophies and certificates. I still practice every day, Elena said, following Jordan's gaze. Not because I expect to fight, but because it keeps me centered, balanced. It reminds me who I am. She poured tea from a ceramic pot, green tea that smelled like jasmine. They sat on cushions on the floor, and Elena asked Jordan to tell her story. Jordan did, haltingly at first, and then in a rush, describing the bullying and the isolation and the bathroom incident and the fear that had become her constant companion. Elena listened without interrupting, her face thoughtful and calm. When Jordan finished, Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You want to know if you should fight them." "I don't know what I want," Jordan admitted. "I just want it to stop." "Fighting them would make you feel powerful," Elena said. "In the moment, it would feel like justice. But it would not solve your problem. It would create new problems. The school would punish you, your mother would be disappointed, and the bullies would become victims, and you would become the villain in everyone's story." Jordan felt tears stinging her eyes again. "So I just keep letting them hurt me? That doesn't seem right either." "No," Elena agreed, "you don't let them hurt you. But you also don't hurt them. Instead, you show them that you cannot be hurt, that their cruelty has no power over you, that you are stronger than their small, frightened need to make you small and frightened too." She set down her teacup and stood up, moving to the center of the mat. "Come, let me see what you remember." For the next hour, Elena put Jordan through her paces, testing her forms and her techniques. Jordan was rusty, her timing off, her strikes lacking the precision she had once possessed. But Elena was patient, correcting her stance, adjusting her angles, reminding her of the principles Sarah had taught: control, economy, efficiency. "You're thinking too much," Elena said at one point, after Jordan had fumbled a combination for the third time. "You're in your head, planning every move, worrying about doing it right. But real conflict is not like practice. You cannot plan. You can only react. And your reactions must come from training that is so deep, it's instinctive." She demonstrated a simple defense against a grab, moving with such fluid grace that Jordan barely saw what happened. One moment, Elena was standing still, and the next, she had slipped the imaginary attack and positioned herself in perfect balance, ready to counter or escape. See, no thought, just movement, just response. Your body knows what to do if your mind stops interfering. They trained together 3 times a week after that, sometimes 4. Elena never charged Jordan, never asked for anything except that Jordan show up and work hard. She taught Jordan not just physical techniques, but philosophy, strategy, awareness. They talked about conflict resolution, about de-escalation, about the difference between being aggressive and being assertive. Elena shared stories from her own life, about the bullying she had endured as a young woman, about the violence she had witnessed, about the choice she had made to learn how to protect herself without becoming a perpetrator of violence. "The hardest lesson," Elena said one evening while they were cooling down, "is learning that you cannot control other people. You can only control yourself. The bullies will do what they do because they are broken inside, because they are afraid of their own inadequacy, because they learned cruelty from someone who was cruel to them. You cannot fix them. You cannot make them understand. All you can do is refuse to be broken by them." Jordan absorbed these lessons like a sponge, taking them into her body and her mind. She continued training at home, but now with renewed purpose and better technique. She ran every morning, practiced her forms every night, studied the mental disciplines Elena taught her. She meditated, learning to quiet her mind and find her center. She practiced visualization, imagining scenarios, and her calm, controlled responses. At school, the changes in Jordan became visible to anyone who was paying attention. She walked differently now, with her shoulders back and her head up. She didn't flinch when Brittany approached her in the hallway. She didn't hide in the library during lunch anymore. She ate in the cafeteria, at her small table near the emergency exit, but now she looked around instead of keeping her eyes down. She watched people, noticed things, became aware of the social dynamics playing out around her. Other students began to notice her noticing. A few people nodded at her in the hallways. One girl, a quiet student named Rachel Kim, who often sat alone in the back of their English class, asked if she could sit at Jordan's lunch table. Jordan said yes, and they ate together in companionable silence, two outsiders finding small comfort in shared isolation. Brittany noticed the changes too, and she didn't like them. It was early November, 2 months into the school year, when things escalated again. Jordan had stayed after school for a meeting with Mrs. Henderson about a college recommendation letter. When she left the classroom, the hallways were mostly empty, the other students having dispersed to after-school activities or home. Jordan headed toward the main exit, her mind on the homework she needed to finish that evening. She didn't see them until they were already surrounding her. Brittany, Madison, Ashley, Dylan, and Jake. All 5 of them blocking the hallway, cutting off any easy escape. Jordan stopped, her hand tightening on the strap of her backpack. Elena's voice echoed in her mind. Stay calm, assess, look for exits, never let them see fear. We need to talk, Brittany said, her voice hard. You've been acting weird lately, walking around like you're somebody. We don't like it. Jordan said nothing, just looked at each of them in turn, measuring distances, noting postures. Dylan was closest to her left, slightly off balance. Jake was to her right, but focused on his phone. Not fully present. The girls were directly ahead, forming a line. We gave you a chance, Madison added. We tried to be nice, tried to help you understand that you don't fit here. But you're not listening. So we're going to make it really clear, Ashley said, stepping forward. You need to transfer to a different school. Or drop out. We don't care which. But you can't stay here. Jordan felt her heart rate increase. Felt the adrenaline start to flood her system, but she kept her breathing steady. Elena had taught her this too, how to control the physiological response to fear, how to stay present and aware even when every instinct screamed at her to run. I'm not going anywhere, Jordan said quietly. Her voice was steady, calm, almost disinterested. You don't get to decide where I go to school. Brittany's face flushed with anger. Oh, we don't. We'll see about that. She lunged forward, hand outstretched to grab Jordan's shirt or push her or something. Jordan wasn't sure. But Jordan was already moving, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. She sidestepped smoothly, letting Brittany's momentum carry her past, then pivoted to face the group again. Brittany stumbled, caught herself on a locker, and turned back with rage in her eyes. Did you just dodge me? She said, her voice rising. Did you seriously just... Jordan didn't wait for her to finish. She turned and walked away, not running but moving with purpose toward the nearest exit. Behind her, she heard Brittany shouting something, heard Dylan laugh, heard footsteps following her. But Jordan was already outside, already in the parking lot, already walking toward the street where witnesses and cars and safety existed. She heard Dylan's truck start up behind her, heard the engine rev, and for a moment she wondered if he would actually try to run her down. But Elena had taught her about this too, about projecting confidence, about walking like someone who couldn't be intimidated. Jordan kept walking, steady and unhurried, and the truck stayed in the parking lot, its engine growling impotently. That night, Jordan told Elena what had happened. They were in Elena's sunroom, drinking tea after a particularly intense training session. Elena listened thoughtfully, then nodded. You did well, she said. You stayed calm. You avoided escalation. You didn't give them what they wanted. What did they want? Jordan asked. A reaction. Fear. Evidence that they still have power over you. Eleanor paused, considering. They're losing control of the narrative. You're not behaving like a victim anymore, so they don't know how to treat you. It confuses them, frustrates them, so they'll escalate, Jordan said. Probably, Elena agreed. They'll do something bigger, something public, something designed to humiliate you so completely that you'll have no choice but to react or leave. They'll push until you break or until they break. Jordan felt a chill run through her. What do I do? Elena smiled, a small, sad smile. You continue to be who you are becoming. You stay balanced. You refuse to play their game. And when they finally push too hard, when they finally cross a line they cannot uncross, you will be ready to respond with exactly the right amount of force and no more. The days grew shorter as November progressed. Riverside Valley High prepared for Thanksgiving break with a series of pep rallies and fundraisers and social events that Jordan largely ignored. She focused on her classes, on her training, on the slowly growing friendship with Rachel Kim, who turned out to be funny and kind, and dealing with her own struggles with anxiety and social isolation. Rachel lived on the other side of town, in a neighborhood that wasn't quite as affluent as the one where Brittany and her friends resided. Her parents ran a small Korean restaurant that barely broke even, and Rachel helped out there on weekends, serving customers and washing dishes and watching her younger siblings. She and Jordan bonded over their shared experience of financial insecurity, of being outsiders in a school that celebrated wealth and conformity. I used to try to fit in, Rachel confided one day at lunch. I tried to dress like them, talk like them, pretend I cared about the same things, but it never worked. They could tell I was faking, and it just made them meaner. So eventually I gave up and decided to just be invisible. Invisibility doesn't really work either, though, Jordan said. No, Rachel agreed. It just makes you disappear from yourself. Like if you spend enough time trying to be invisible, you start to feel like maybe you don't actually exist. They talked about colleges they wanted to attend, careers they imagined, lives they hoped to build far away from Riverside Valley High. They shared recommendations for books and music and movies. They texted each other late at night when the loneliness became too heavy. It wasn't a grand friendship, but it was real, and it reminded Jordan that she was not alone in the world. There was someone else, too, who had begun to pay attention to Jordan, though she didn't realize it at first. His name was Christopher Park, and he was a senior in the drama program. He was tall and lanky, with dark hair that fell into his eyes, and a quiet intensity that marked him as artistic. He wasn't popular in the traditional sense. He didn't play sports or hang out with the mainstream crowd, but he was respected by his peers for his talent and his genuine kindness. He directed the school's plays, wrote poetry that was occasionally published in the literary magazine, and generally moved through the social hierarchy without much concern for its rules. Jordan had seen him around, of course, but they had never spoken. They existed in different orbits, different worlds, within the same physical space. But Christopher had noticed her, had seen the way she carried herself, had witnessed some of the smaller cruelties inflicted on her by Brittany and her friends. He had thought about intervening, but wasn't sure how, wasn't sure if his interference would help or hurt. It was the week before Thanksgiving when Christopher finally approached Jordan. She was in the library, working on an essay, when he sat down at her table without asking permission. Jordan looked up startled and found him studying her with curious, thoughtful eyes. "Hi," he said. "I'm Christopher. I've seen you around." "Jordan," she said cautiously. People didn't usually sit with her voluntarily unless they were planning to mock her. "I know," Christopher said. "I've heard people talking about you. They say a lot of stupid things." Jordan didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. "I wanted to tell you that I think you're brave," Christopher continued. "The way you just keep showing up every day, even though people are terrible to you, that takes courage." Jordan felt something in her chest tighten. "I'm not brave. I'm just stuck here." That's the definition of brave, isn't it? Doing what you have to do even when you're scared? Christopher smiled, a gentle smile that transformed his face. "Anyway, I wanted to say that. And I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in helping with the winter play. We need people to work on set design and costumes. You don't have to be on stage or anything. Just like painting backdrops and sewing things. It's actually pretty fun, and the drama people are pretty cool. Jordan considered this. Part of her wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her isolation, wanted to avoid any situation where she might be rejected or humiliated again. But another part of her, the part that was slowly learning to take up space in the world, whispered that maybe this was an opportunity. "Okay," she said. "I'll try it." Christopher's smile widened. "Great. We meet after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the auditorium. Come by this Thursday if you want. No pressure." He left, and Jordan sat there for a long moment, processing what had just happened. Someone had reached out to her, had offered inclusion, had seen her as more than a target or a victim. It felt fragile and precious and terrifying. Thursday afternoon, Jordan went to the auditorium. The drama kids were a mix of personalities and aesthetics, everything from goth kids to theater nerds to surprisingly popular students who seemed to exist comfortably in multiple social spheres. They welcomed Jordan without fanfare, put a paintbrush in her hand, and set her to work painting a backdrop for the winter production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. It was peaceful work, meditative and satisfying. Jordan painted alongside a girl named Aisha, who was applying to art schools, and a boy named Marcus, who played guitar in a local band. They talked about movies and music and their weekend plans, normal teenage conversation that Jordan had been starved for. No one mentioned Brittany or the bathroom incident or Jordan's outsider status. They just accepted her presence as natural and unremarkable. Christopher worked nearby, directing the construction of set pieces and discussing lighting design with the technical crew. He caught Jordan's eye at one point and smiled, a small acknowledgement that she was here, that she belonged, that this space was safe. For the first time since arriving at Riverside Valley High, Jordan felt like maybe she could build something here, could create a life beyond just survival. It was a fragile feeling, easily shattered, but it was real. Of course, Brittany noticed. It was the Tuesday after Thanksgiving break, the school buzzing with holiday energy and the upcoming winter formal, when Brittany cornered Jordan in the hallway outside the auditorium. Jordan was leaving drama practice, her hands still stained with paint, her mind peaceful and relaxed. She didn't see Brittany until it was too late to avoid her. "So you're a drama freak now?" Brittany said, leaning against a locker with her arms crossed. "That's perfect. I bet they're all weirdos and losers, just like you." Jordan kept walking, but Brittany moved to block her path. "I'm talking to you," Brittany said, her voice sharp. "Don't ignore me." Jordan stopped and looked directly at Brittany for the first time in weeks. She saw what she hadn't seen before, the insecurity beneath the arrogance, the fear behind the cruelty. Brittany was beautiful and popular and powerful, but she was also terrified of losing that power, of being revealed as ordinary or inadequate or unimportant. "Excuse me," Jordan said quietly. "I need to get to my locker." Brittany's face flushed with anger. "Oh, you need to get to your locker? Well, I need you to understand something. Christopher Park, he's mine. I went out with him last year, and he's still into me. He only talked to you because I told him I thought you were, like, pathetic and needed friends. So don't get any ideas about him. You're not in his league." Jordan knew this was a lie. She could see it in the desperation in Brittany's eyes, hear it in the slightly too loud voice. But she didn't argue, didn't engage. She just said, "Okay," and walked around Brittany toward her locker. Behind her, Brittany shouted, "You're such a freak. Everyone thinks you're weird. Nobody actually likes you." Jordan kept walking, her heart pounding but her face calm. She reached her locker, collected her things, and walked out to the parking lot where the afternoon sun was already setting. Rachel was waiting for her, having stayed late for the school newspaper meeting, and they walked home together, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. That night, Elena asked Jordan how school had been. They were in the sunroom, working on a complex grappling sequence that required precise timing and balance. Jordan told her about Brittany's confrontation, about the lie about Christopher, about the shouting in the hallway. Elena stopped mid-movement and looked at Jordan seriously. She's getting desperate. That's good and bad. How is it good? Jordan asked. Because desperate people make mistakes, they overreach, they cross lines. And when they do, they create opportunities for you to respond in ways that are justified and proportionate. Elena paused. But it's also bad because desperate people are dangerous. They stop thinking clearly. They escalate beyond what's reasonable. So, what do I do? You stay ready. You stay balanced. You don't provoke, but you don't cower. And when the moment comes, and it will come, Jordan, I promise you, you respond with exactly as much force as necessary and no more. You don't hurt them, you just show them that you cannot be hurt. The moment came 2 weeks later, at the winter formal. Jordan hadn't planned to attend. She didn't have money for a ticket, much less a dress, and the idea of spending an evening watching Brittany and her friends dance and laugh and rule their kingdom held no appeal. But Christopher had asked her to help with the setup, had offered to pay her ticket cost out of his own pocket, and Jordan had reluctantly agreed. Rachel was going too, working the photography booth to earn community service hours, so at least Jordan wouldn't be alone. The formal was held in the school gymnasium, which had been transformed with lights and decorations into something almost magical. A DJ played music that was too loud, and students danced in clusters, their faces flushed and happy. Jordan worked behind the scenes, helping to manage the refreshment table and making sure the decorations stayed in place. She wore jeans and a plain black shirt, deliberately anonymous, hoping to get through the evening without incident. For the first hour, everything was fine. Jordan worked quietly, stayed out of the way, watched the social dynamics play out like a nature documentary. Christopher found her during a break and thanked her for helping, told her she could take some time to actually enjoy the dance if she wanted. Jordan thanked him, but said she was fine where she was. It was during the second hour, when the dance floor was crowded and the lights were low, that everything fell apart. Jordan was carrying a tray of plastic cups toward the refreshment table when someone bumped into her from behind, hard enough to make her stumble. The cups went flying, sticky punch splashing across the floor and onto the shoes of several nearby students. Jordan turned to see Madison standing there, her hand over her mouth in exaggerated shock. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Madison said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "I didn't see you there." "You're just so small and invisible." The students who had been splashed looked annoyed, but mostly blamed Jordan for the mess. She knelt down to start cleaning up the spilled cups, but before she could gather them, someone stepped in the puddle deliberately, tracking punch across the clean floor. Jordan looked up to see Ashley standing there, smirking. "You should really be more careful," Ashley said. "Someone could slip and get hurt." Jordan stood up slowly, her hands full of empty cups, and found herself face to face with Brittany. The Queen Bee was wearing a sparkly silver dress that probably cost more than Jordan's entire wardrobe, and she was smiling a smile that promised cruelty. "You know what?" Brittany said, her voice carrying over the music. "I just realized you're wearing the same clothes you wear to school every day. Did you seriously not dress up for the formal? That's so disrespectful." A circle was forming around them now, students sensing drama and gathering to watch. Jordan felt the attention like a physical weight, felt the judgment in their eyes. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to be anywhere but here. But Elena's voice was in her head, steady and calm. "Stand your ground. Don't react. Let them expose themselves." "I'm working," Jordan said quietly. "I'm not here to dance." "You're working?" Brittany laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "That's so sad. You can't even afford a ticket to your own school dance. Does your mom know you're this pathetic?" Jordan felt something hot and sharp pierce through her chest at the mention of her mother. She clenched her hands around the plastic cups, felt them crumple in her grip. Behind Brittany, she could see Dylan and Jake pushing through the crowd, drawn by the spectacle. "Leave her alone, Brittany," a voice said. Christopher had appeared at the edge of the circle, his face concerned. "This isn't cool." "Oh, Christopher," Brittany purred, turning to him. "Are you defending your little pet project?" "That's so cute. But you should know she's, like, obsessed with you. She probably thinks you're actually interested in her." Christopher's face darkened. "You're being cruel for no reason. Stop." "I'm being honest," Brittany shot back. "Someone needs to tell her that she doesn't belong here, that she's never going to fit in, that everyone talks about how weird and pathetic she is." The circle of students was growing larger now, nearly blocking the dance floor. The DJ had lowered the music slightly, sensing the shift in energy. Teachers were starting to notice, starting to move toward the commotion, but they were on the far side of the gym and pushing through the crowd of teenagers. Jordan stood in the center of the circle, surrounded by hostility and judgment and cruel entertainment, and felt something inside her shift. She was done being small, done being silent, done letting these people define her worth. But she wouldn't fight them. She wouldn't become what they accused her of being. "You're right," Jordan said, her voice clear and steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't fit in here. I'm not rich. I'm not popular. I don't have designer clothes or a new car or parents who can buy my way out of consequences." Brittany's smile faltered slightly, confused by Jordan's sudden willingness to speak. "But that doesn't make me pathetic," Jordan continued. "That makes me real. Everything about me is real. My clothes are real. My struggles are real. My kindness is real. Can you say the same, Brittany?" The crowd was silent now, watching, waiting. Brittany's face was turning red, her hands clenching into fists. "You think you're so much better than everyone else," Brittany said, her voice shaking with rage. "You think you're special because you're poor and tragic, but you're just a loser who nobody wants here." "Then why do you spend so much time thinking about me?" Jordan asked. "If I'm nobody, if I'm invisible, why have you dedicated months of your life to making me miserable? What am I taking from you that makes you so scared?" It was the exactly right question and the exactly wrong time to ask it. Brittany's face contorted with fury, and she lunged forward, hands outstretched, going for Jordan's face or hair or throat. Jordan saw it coming, had time to prepare, had every technique Elena had taught her ready to deploy, but she didn't need to use them because Rachel stepped between them, small and scared but determined, and said, "Stop it, just stop." Brittany nearly knocked Rachel over in her momentum, but Jake grabbed Brittany's arm and pulled her back. The teachers had finally pushed through the crowd, and Mrs. Henderson was shouting for everyone to disperse, to back up, to give them space. Principal Davis arrived moments later, his face grave, and separated Brittany and Jordan with the wall of his authority. He demanded to know what had happened, and 20 different students tried to explain at once, each with their own version of events. Through it all, Jordan stood silent and calm, her hands loose at her sides, her breathing steady. The aftermath was complicated. Brittany, Madison, Ashley, Dylan, and Jake were all suspended for 3 days for harassment and attempting to start a fight at a school event. Brittany's parents hired a lawyer and threatened to sue the school, claimed their daughter was being targeted, insisted that Jordan had provoked the entire incident. The school board held an emergency meeting. The local newspaper wrote an article about bullying at Riverside Valley High that didn't name names, but made it clear where the fault lay. Jordan was called to the principal's office multiple times, asked to give her version of events, encouraged to consider transferring to a different school where she might have a fresh start. She refused politely but firmly, explaining that she had done nothing wrong and would not be driven away by people who had systematically tormented her for months. The other students, the witnesses who had watched the confrontation, began to come forward with their own stories. They described incidents they had seen, cruelties they had witnessed, patterns of behavior that painted a damning picture of Brittany and her friends. Some felt guilty for not speaking up sooner. Others were just tired of the toxic social hierarchy and saw this as an opportunity for change. Christopher wrote an editorial for the school newspaper about the culture of cruelty and silence at Riverside Valley High, calling for students to stand up for each other and refuse to participate in bullying. Rachel created an anonymous Instagram account where students could share their own experiences with harassment. The account exploded with submissions, story after story of pain and fear and isolation. The winter formal incident became a catalyst for something larger, something that had been building beneath the surface of the school's glossy exterior for years. Teachers started paying attention. Administrators implemented new policies. Students who had been silent found their voices. But for Jordan, the most important change happened inside herself. She had stood in that circle, surrounded by hostility, and she had not broken. She had not attacked. She had not run away. She had simply stood her ground and spoken her truth and refused to be diminished. Elena had been right. Strength wasn't about fighting. It was about balance, about knowing who you were and refusing to let anyone else define you. The 3 days that Brittany and her friends were suspended, Riverside Valley High felt different. The hallways were quieter, less tense. Students moved with easier breathing, laughed more freely, existed without the constant awareness of social hierarchy and its enforcers. Jordan walked through those hallways with her head up, making eye contact, saying hello to people she had never spoken to before. On the 4th day, when the suspended students returned, the atmosphere shifted again, but it was different this time. Brittany walked through the front doors with her usual confidence, but there was something fragile about it now, something forced. Other students watched her with new eyes, eyes that had seen her revealed for what she truly was. The power she had wielded so carelessly had been cracked, maybe not broken, but definitely damaged. She saw Jordan near the main entrance, and their eyes met for just a moment. Jordan didn't look away, didn't flinch, just held her gaze calmly until Brittany turned and walked away. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. The balance had shifted. That afternoon, Jordan went to Eleanor's house for training. They worked through their usual routines, but there was something different in the way Jordan moved, a confidence that hadn't been there before. Eleanor noticed it immediately and smiled. "You understand now," Elena said when they were cooling down. "Understand what?" Jordan asked. "That you were never weak. You were always strong. You just needed to remember it." Elena poured tea, handed Jordan a cup. "The bullies sensed something in you from the beginning, something they recognized as strength, even if you didn't see it yourself. That's why they targeted you. Not because you were weak, but because you were strong, and that threatened them." Jordan thought about this, turning the teacup in her hands. "I don't feel that different than I did before." "You're not different," Elena said. "You're just more yourself. More fully present in your own life. That's all transformation really is, becoming more authentically who you already are." In the weeks following the winter formal incident, Jordan's life at Riverside Valley High continued to evolve. She became more involved in the drama program, discovering a talent for set design that surprised her. She and Rachel grew closer, their friendship deepening into something sisterly and essential. She studied hard, maintained her grades, helped her mother with bills and groceries and the 1,000 small tasks of keeping their household running. And she continued training with Elena, not because she expected to need to defend herself again, but because the discipline and the practice had become essential parts of who she was. The training gave her balance, gave her center, gave her a way to process the stress and uncertainty of her life. Christopher asked her to the spring formal in March, a casual invitation that surprised Jordan until she realized that they had become genuine friends over the months of working together on set design. She said yes, and her mother helped her find a dress at the thrift store, a simple blue thing that fit perfectly. Jordan went to the formal and danced and laughed and felt, for the first time in a long time, like a normal teenager enjoying a normal evening. Brittany was there too, of course, surrounded by her remaining friends, still beautiful and still popular, but somehow diminished. She didn't approach Jordan, didn't acknowledge her presence. The invisible truce held. But the real conclusion came in April, during a school assembly about tolerance and inclusion that Principal Davis had organized as part of the district's response to the bullying crisis. Students filled the auditorium, restless and bored, expecting the usual platitudes about being kind and standing up for each other. Instead, Principal Davis invited students to share their own experiences, to talk about times they had been hurt or times they had hurt others. It was risky, potentially disastrous, but he opened the floor and waited. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, a boy from the soccer team stood up and talked about being mocked for his accent when his family had moved from Mexico. A girl from the advanced placement classes described being called names for being smart. One by one, students shared their stories, their pain, their regrets. And then Brittany Caldwell stood up. The auditorium fell silent, all eyes turning to her. She walked slowly to the microphone on the stage, her hands shaking visibly. Principal Davis looked surprised, but stepped back, giving her space. Brittany cleared her throat, stared out at the sea of faces and said, "I need to say something." Her voice cracked on the last word. She closed her eyes, took a breath, tried again. "I've been horrible to people. To a lot of people, but especially to one person. I told myself it was just joking around, just fun, just the way things were. But it wasn't. It was cruel. I was cruel." She paused, and Jordan realized with shock that Brittany was crying, tears streaming down her perfect face, ruining her perfect makeup. "I bullied Jordan Blake because I was jealous of her. I know that sounds insane, because she had nothing and I had everything. But it's true. She had this strength, this dignity, this way of being herself even when everyone was against her. And I hated her for it because I knew I could never be like that. I knew that if someone treated me the way I treated her, I would fall apart." The auditorium was completely silent now. Even the teachers were frozen, watching. "I'm sorry," Brittany said, looking directly at Jordan, who was sitting in the fourth row between Rachel and Christopher. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you. For the bathroom and the cafeteria and all the times I made you feel small and worthless. You didn't deserve any of it, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it publicly in front of everyone because that's where I hurt you." She stepped away from the microphone, her face crumpled with shame and grief, and walked quickly out of the auditorium. Madison and Ashley followed her, and the three girls disappeared through the side door. The assembly continued, but Jordan barely heard the rest of it. She sat in her seat, processing what had just happened, feeling something inside her chest unclench. After the assembly, Jordan found Brittany sitting on a bench outside the gymnasium, alone, her face buried in her hands. Jordan almost walked past, almost let it go, but something made her stop. She sat down on the bench, a careful distance away, and waited. Brittany eventually looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Why are you here?" Brittany asked, her voice hoarse. "I don't know," Jordan admitted. Maybe because I think you meant what you said in there. Brittany laughed, a broken sound. Yeah, I did. Doesn't change anything, though. I still did all those things. I still was that person. You were, Jordan agreed, but people can change. If they really want to. They sat in silence for a moment. Two girls who had been enemies, who had hurt and been hurt, who were both trying to figure out how to move forward. Finally, Brittany said, "How did you do it? How did you just keep going every day when I was making your life hell?" Jordan thought about this question, about all the mornings she had dragged herself out of bed, all the days she had walked through those hallways with her heart pounding, all the nights she had cried in the garage while practicing her forms. "I had help," she said. "I had my mom, even though she didn't know what was happening. I had training that reminded me who I was, and eventually I had friends who believed in me. But mostly, I just decided that you didn't get to determine my worth, that I was valuable whether you saw it or not." Brittany nodded slowly. "I wish I had learned that my worth wasn't about being popular or perfect or in control. Maybe I wouldn't have needed to hurt you to feel powerful." "You can learn it now," Jordan said. "It's not too late." She stood up, shouldered her backpack and walked away. Behind her, she heard Brittany crying again, quieter this time, the sound of someone beginning the long work of becoming better. Jordan didn't know if Brittany would actually change, if the apology was genuine or performative, if they would ever be friends or just careful acquaintances. But that wasn't her responsibility. She had done her part. The rest was up to Brittany. The school year wound toward its conclusion. Jordan finished her junior year with strong grades and a growing sense of possibility. She had survived, and more than that, she had become someone stronger, someone she respected. She continued her training with Eleanor, continued her friendship with Rachel and Christopher, continued to carve out a space for herself in the world that was authentic and real. Her father came home in early May, sunburned and tired, and so happy to see his family that he cried when he hugged Jordan at the airport. She told him about the school year, about the bullying and the confrontation and the transformation. He listened without interrupting, his face grave, and when she finished, he said, "I'm proud of you." Not for standing up to them, though that took courage, but for not letting them turn you into something you're not. For staying kind, even when people were cruel. They went to visit Elena together, and Jordan's father thanked her for the training and the mentorship and the wisdom. Elena waved away his gratitude with a smile and said that Jordan had done the hard work herself, that all Elena had done was remind her of tools she already possessed. The last week of school, Jordan was walking through the hallway when she passed Brittany near the main entrance. They made eye contact, and for a moment Jordan thought Brittany might say something. Instead, Brittany just nodded, a small acknowledgement that carried weight. Jordan nodded back, a piece that wasn't quite forgiveness, but was something like acceptance. She walked out into the California sunshine, felt the warmth on her face, and realized that she was looking forward to her senior year, not with dread or anxiety, but with cautious optimism and quiet strength. She had learned that survival wasn't about being invisible or enduring in silence. It was about standing in your truth, refusing to be diminished, and trusting that you were strong enough to weather whatever storms came your way. Jordan Blake had been locked in a bathroom, humiliated and afraid. But she had emerged from that darkness, transformed, not into someone who sought revenge or cruelty, but into someone who knew her own worth and refused to let anyone take it from her. She had made her tormentors cry, not with violence but with truth, not with cruelty but with dignity. And in doing so, she had won a victory that mattered more than any fight could have delivered. She had won herself back. The story didn't end with that moment of triumph at the winter formal, though that was certainly the climax everyone would remember. The real transformation happened in the quiet days that followed, in the slowly rebuilt confidence and the carefully reconstructed sense of self. Jordan had entered Riverside Valley High as a ghost. invisible and powerless. She left her junior year as someone solid and real, someone who knew that strength came from balance, that courage came from compassion, and that the greatest victory was refusing to become the very thing you fought against. Summer arrived with its golden heat and long days. Jordan worked at her mother's clinic, filing papers and answering phones, saving money for college and helping with bills. She trained with Elena twice a week, more for the meditation and discipline than because she expected to need the self-defense. She hung out with Rachel and Christopher, went to the beach, watched movies, did the normal things teenagers did when school was out, and the world felt full of possibility. And she thought about the coming year, her senior year, the final chapter of this particular story. She knew Brittany and her friends would still be there, that the social hierarchies of high school didn't disappear overnight. But she also knew that she was different now, that she had a place in that world, that she belonged not because others granted her permission, but because she claimed her space with quiet confidence. On the last day of August, the day before school started again, Jordan went running through her neighborhood in the early morning cool. She passed the houses of her classmates, the shops and parks and familiar streets that had once felt hostile, but now felt more neutral, more navigable. She ran until her legs burned and her lungs ached and her mind was clear and calm. She stopped at a park bench and sat down, catching her breath, watching the sun rise over the eastern hills. She thought about the girl she had been a year ago, small and scared, and so desperately trying to be invisible. She thought about the girl she was now, still small but no longer scared, present in her own life in a way that felt revolutionary. She thought about all the battles still to come, college applications and financial aid forms, her father's next deployment, the daily challenges of just being young and uncertain in a complicated world. She knew there would be more Brittany's, more people who would try to diminish her or hurt her or make her feel less than she was, but she also knew, with bone-deep certainty, that she could handle it, that she was strong enough, that she had been strong enough all along. Jordan stood up from the bench and turned toward home, toward her mother making breakfast in their small kitchen, toward her father reading the newspaper on their worn couch, toward the life that was modest and beautiful and entirely hers. She walked with her shoulders back and her head up and her hands loose at her sides, balanced and ready and completely unafraid. The bullies had locked her in a bathroom, had tried to make her invisible, had done everything in their power to break her. But Jordan Blake had not broken. She had bent, had adapted, had transformed. And in the end, she had made them see her not as a victim, but as a mirror, reflecting back their own insecurities and cruelties until they had no choice but to confront themselves. She had made them cry not with fists, but with truth. And in doing so, she had proven that the greatest strength wasn't physical power or social dominance or the ability to hurt others. It was the courage to remain yourself, to stand in your truth, to refuse to be diminished even when the whole world seemed bent on making you small. Jordan Blake had won, not because she fought, but because she refused to stop being who she was. And that, in the end, was the only victory that truly mattered.